Today's scripture will come from the book of Psalms, chapter 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on the law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked will perish.
I think I've told you before that Ann and I hiked the Inca Trail for our 25th wedding anniversary. I wanted to go on a cruise, but that's another subject. That's another marital, conflict right there. We see who won that one, right? And at every step, as I was about 14,000 feet, and I had to will myself to walk for 45 seconds and rest for a minute and a half. Ann was butterflying all over the place, and she was at the top just having the greatest time of her life. And I was saying, and I can't say what I was saying because I'm a pastor and this is the church. So just use your imagination on that. And anyway, but I will tell you one good point or part of that. We were in Chile at the time, so it was actually pretty inexpensive for us. We did that whole trip for like $1,500, a 10-day Inca Trail, seeing Cusco and all those things. I mean, that's cheap, right? Right? Okay. I don't know why I added that. It has nothing to do with anything. What I remember most about the trip was that very first campsite that we went to. And it was about 11,500 feet or so. And we were right on the edge of a precipice. And someone had cut out terraces for the tents. And so we were on a terrace, staying on a tent. And in the morning, when dawn was just appearing as streaks in the sky, one of the guides came around, and these tents were about this tall and about this wide, and then the opening would open all the way down so you could put the flap out. And so we could see out. And we were in our sleeping bags, and we sat up, and he brought coffee and pastries, and we watched the sunrise. And we were way up there, and there was this big valley down below us and these snow-capped peaks behind that. That's spectacular. I mean, that is spectacular. We don't have stuff like that. Even in the Rockies, not like that. The Andes, the mountain passes were 14,000 feet. And the peaks went on up from there. Very incredibly beautiful. So as I look back on that experience, I have two very strong impressions from that. One is that kind of beauty doesn't just fall together. Or the fact that I can recognize that as beauty. That doesn't just fall together. That's something that's placed in us by something far greater than we are. But my second impression is that it's not enough. I want more of that. I want to do that again. Maybe with a helicopter. I don't want to climb it again. I want more of that. I want to see it again. I want to be overwhelmed by it again. It stirs deep longings and passions in the soul that I don't really know what to do with. It's almost like trying to get a drink from a fireman's hose that's going at full blast, and it's a lot, and I can't really get it. It's too much, and yet it's not enough. It's overwhelming, and yet I want more. Well, why do I want more? Because it stirs something in my soul. It brings delight to my soul. It does something in there that makes it come alive when you see something like that. This is what everyone is looking for. People want passion. They want delight. They want their souls to be delighted. They want to feel alive. They want to feel happy and feel joy in their hearts. And the choices that people make, whether they do it consciously or subconsciously, is with that end in mind. They choose what they choose because they think that it will bring them some kind of joy or delight or make them alive in some way, even if it's just temporary. That's why we'll choose the pastry instead of not the pastry. Delight to my palate, fat. This is what we do in all these areas of our life. We choose what we think will make our souls come alive. And I don't think it's really working, right? Because our world's full of conflict, distress, anger, violence, anxiety, and so many other things that just seem to be squelching our delight out of us. So how do we get it back? Well, I'm going to propose to you Psalm 1. I'm going to propose to you Psalm 1. It's what they call a wisdom psalm. And as I said before, it sets out the theme of the rest of the Psalter. And it's essentially that there are two paths you can go by. That's a song, isn't it? Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on. Wow, that's a song. Who sang that song? Any rock and rollers here? Yeah, Led Zeppelin. Yeah. I probably shouldn't be saying Led Zeppelin in a sermon. Probably not good. There are two paths you can go down, right? Two paths. It's very simple. It's either God's path or it's any other path. It's either God's path or any other path that you go down. God's path leads to blessedness. Every other path leads to destruction. That is what the psalm is saying, okay? That's the theme of the psalm. That's essentially the theme of the entire Psalter. All 150 psalms. It's being set out right here in Psalm 1. So the argument here is that God's way is the way of delight. So I want to look at two things here very loosely because they overlap like crazy. One is the way of the unblessed, and then one is the way of the blessed. So one is the way of the unblessed. So to talk about the unblessed, I got to talk about the blessed. But to talk about the blessed, I got to talk about the unblessed. So we're going to mix it, and if you get anything out of this, it'll be a God thing here today. So let's go with that. Here's the first one, the way of the unblessed. Verse 6 lays it out clearly. The way of the wicked will perish, okay? It's not mincing any words whatsoever. The way of the wicked will perish. So the psalmist is arguing that this is the end result of what he calls the wicked, or as I'm calling here, the unblessed, okay? So who are the unblessed or the wicked? They are the opposite of the blessed. So let's look at who the blessed are. The blessed are happy, fulfilled, the translation of the biblical word for blessed is happy, fulfilled, at peace, full of divine favor. That's the blessed. So the psalm calls the unblessed by three different names in verse 1. Wicked, sinners, or scoffers. Okay, those are the three names that he gives. Now, this is typical Hebrew poetry where you have parallelism. And the parallelism is, blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, does not stand in the way of sinners, does not sit in the seat of scoffers. So you might say that those are synonyms. But what I think is really interesting here, and there's disagreement about this in scholarly circles, but what I think is very interesting here is the three words that it uses for what those who become wicked or are wicked do. They walk, they stand, and they sit. So they're walking along and they get interested in what's going on, and so they stop, they stand, and then pretty soon they're getting overwhelmed by it and they sit down and they get comfortable in it. It's a cool progression. I think it has merit. Might think about it. Go meditate on that a little bit. But it is that progression that I think is there. So the question is, who are the wicked, the sinners, or the scoffers? That's the million-dollar question, right? No one thinks they're part of that group. But everyone thinks they are definitely people that are in the other category, of course. So the people that are in that category of the unblessed, the wicked, the scoffers, the wicked, the sinners, or the scoffers, are usually laid out for people, or they're there for people that you don't agree with, right? And since everything is in political terms these days, Republicans think that the Democrats are the scoffers, the wicked, and the sinners, and Democrats think the Republicans are the wicked, the sinners, and the scoffers. You just have to turn on TV for 1 second. You turn on Fox News, you'll see that the Democrats are the wicked, the sinners, and the scoffers. And if you turn on CNN, you'll see that the Republicans are the wicked, the sinners, and the scoffers. So this is where we are right now. So the rules have changed over the years, right? So 80 years ago now, or I don't know how many years ago, the powers that be didn't care if you were a racist. They didn't care if you polluted the world. That you were labeled wicked if you slept around, got an abortion, got a tattoo, and listened to rock music. That was, these are just some of the categories. But today, sleeping around is no big deal. Abortions are commonplace. Almost half of all Westerners have tattoos now. But you're wicked if you don't care for the environment, if you're a racist, or you don't look out for social justice, if you oppose the LGBTQ movement. Now, what's interesting about that is the shifting, you might say, morality, or the shifting sands of what is wicked and what is not wicked. In both categories, you have things that God loves and things that God doesn't like. In both categories, but this is the way our culture has shifted. It's a moving target. And why is that? Because there's really no ultimate standard. It comes down to what you think is good or bad. What you like is good, and what you don't like is bad, but nothing has changed in the world. Blaise Pascal, the 17th century philosopher and mathematician, said people almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. So the fact that my standard for who is wicked and who isn't wicked is what it is because it's based on what I like at the moment. And it goes collectively as a group, as a cultural group, as a nation. This is the way we do it. It comes down to what you think will bring you delight and blessedness. But here's the thing. Its path is fraught with unblessedness. In the movie Fences, Denzel Washington plays a man by the name of Troy Maxson, who's a 53-year-old man who works for the sanitation department. And Troy has just told his wife, Rose, that he's been having an affair with a younger woman. So here's the conversation that ensues, a slightly condensed version. His wife, Roy, says, "I've got 18 years of my life invested in you. You ought to have stayed upstairs in my bed where you belong." Troy says, "Rose, now listen to me. We can get a handle on this thing. We can talk this out, come to an understanding." And Rose says, "All of a sudden it's we? Where was we at when you was down there rolling around with some godforsaken woman? We should have come to an understanding before you started making a fool of yourself. And Troy says, it's just, she gives me a different idea, a different understanding about myself. I can step out of this house and get away from the pressures and problems, be a different man. I ain't got to wonder how I'm going to pay the bills or get the roof fixed. I can just be a part of myself that I ain't never been. I can sit up in her house and laugh. Do you understand what I'm saying? I can laugh out loud and it feels good. It reaches all the way down to the bottom of my shoes. Rose, I can't give that up. And Rose says, maybe you ought to go on and stay down there with her if she a better woman than me. And Troy says, it ain't about nobody being a better woman or nothing. I done locked myself into a pattern trying to take care of you and all that. I forgot about myself. Rose, I done tried all my life to live decent, to live a clean, hard, useful life. I tried to be a good husband to you in every way I knew how. Maybe I come into the world backwards. I don't know. Here's a man in his quest for delight. He'd forgotten about himself. It was time to take care of himself. And so in a adulterous affair, he can feel better, he can laugh, he can get away, he can play make-believe. His soul is light until it isn't. Until it isn't. And you have disaster on your hand. So what is the definition of wickedness in Psalm 1? I think it's simply this: seeking my ultimate delight in anything but God. Or said another way, trying to fill the hole in my soul with anything but God. Why is it that the wicked perish? It's because the Bible argues that God is the center of all things. Without him, all things would cease to exist. So those who do not seek him or delight in him will ultimately perish. Because without God, there is no joy or delight. There is nothing. This is the ultimate end. Without God, there is nothing. That's the argument of the psalm. Where are you finding your delight today? Is it in the things around you, in your circumstances? You've got to move from your circumstances in a way that will make you feel better because life is about you. Are you wanting your circumstances to improve? They might not. They might not. Maybe you're following the path of unblessedness. Well, let's look at point number 2, the way of the blessed. So verse 1 is saying that the blessed are those that do not walk like that. They do not walk in the way of sinners and the counsel, I can't remember them all, wicked, sinners, scoffers, right? But the blessed are those who, in verse 2, listen to this, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. The blessed are those who delight in him. So if you look at the word here for delight, the Hebrew word is hepso, and it means delight or pleasure. If you look up what the word delight means, it's this: a high degree of pleasure or enjoyment, joy or rapture. Does it seem strange to you that God is asking you to have a great deal of pleasure or enjoyment or joy or rapture? That doesn't seem Christian, does it? The entire narrative that's out there about Christianity is that is rules-based. You can't do, you can't. Even Christians believe that. You better line up all the rules that we have. But he's saying it's delight. It's delight. It's pleasure. To great degree of pleasure or enjoyment or joy or rapture. That seems to not really make any sense. But do we realize that part of obedience is to seek joy? Some would say that that's self-centered, and that's not really part of the Christian life, because we're just trying to seek our own pleasure. John Piper, who's a well-known pastor, he wrote a book called Christian Hedonism. And what he's done is he's changed our first catechism. Now, he's a Baptist. He's not allowed to use our confession of faith. You know, what is he doing? I don't know what he's doing. We're Presbyterian. This is ours, right? All right. First catechism is, what is the chief end of man? And the response is, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Piper wants to change that by one word. He wants to say the chief end of man is to glorify God by enjoying him forever. By enjoying him forever. And then he uses the following example. He says, let's say it's your wife's birthday, and she's tired at the end of the day, and you go and you buy flowers, and you stand at the door and you ring the bell. She thinks that's a little strange. She opens the door, and there you are with flowers, and she says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm doing my duty. Is that the right answer? That's the wrong answer, right? That wouldn't be a good way to go about that. What is the right answer? He says the right answer is, you come to the door, she says, what are you doing? And you say, it is my greatest joy to make you happy. It is my greatest delight to give you these flowers. I've planned for a babysitter. We're going to go out. We have a reservation at a restaurant. And it would be my greatest and highest pleasure and joy for you to just enjoy the evening. Is his wife going to respond? You are so self-centered. It's just about your joy, isn't it? You just want it to be about you. No, she's not going to respond that way. The fact that you take such pleasure and such joy in making her happy, she'll be over the moon with that, right? Isn't that what's being implied here? We are to take such delight in honoring our God because he's worthy of all glory and praise. We glorify him by enjoying him. And we seek to enjoy him. We seek to delight in him because that is what brings him the greatest honor and glory, because it's not just our actions, it's our entire being. Our hearts are engaged with him, and we are relishing this. So how do we do that? Most of us are so busy in life trying to be successful or be fulfilled or to accomplish great feats. We're so busy doing all these things that we don't have time even to give him much of a nod, let alone absolutely delight in him. What are you trying to find your delight in? Because everybody's trying to find it in something. We seem to be obsessed over so many things, but here in our world, our sexual revolution and all these things, it seems like the idea of romantic attraction seems to be one of the biggest draws for us, where we think we're going to find delight and joy and happiness. Kimberly Johnson, who's a professor at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland, sought to determine if romantic comedies influence how we view love, sex, and marriage. So they examined 40 box office hits between 1995 and 2005, such as Runaway Bride, Notting Hill, You've Got Mail, Made in Manhattan, and While You Were Sleeping. I'm sure none of you have seen any of those. It'd be very worldly if you had. Her conclusion was that a steady diet of romantic sitcom movies sets us up to be disappointed with the imperfect love of spouses or family, because watching these films creates wildly unrealistic expectations. This is what we do in our lives. We create unrealistic expectations that are constantly dashed. Relationships break apart. Things go bad. We don't get what we want. So many ways that we've set our hearts and our delight on these things and they don't last. And we just keep seeking them and seeking them. So how do we delight in the Lord? Here it gives us a clue at the end of verse 2. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. This is a spending time with God thing. The delight doesn't come overnight. The delight doesn't come by this instant gratification. It comes by meditating. That implies time. Brother Lawrence was a lay brother in a Carmelite monastery in Paris for almost 50 years in the 17th century. His early life was difficult. They were very poor. He joined the army so that he would have regular food. And he joined the army during the 30 Years' War, and he was wounded. He was wounded pretty severely, and he was handicapped the rest of his life. When he joined the monastery, he was assigned to be a cook in the kitchen. But he made it his practice that no matter what he was doing, he wanted to experience the presence of God in all that he did. He wanted to live before the face of God, even in the mundane. While he was cooking or while he was peeling potatoes or whatever he was doing, he sought to live in the presence and before the face of God. So much so that he became a tremendous influence. He was just in the kitchen, for heaven's sakes. He became a tremendous influence on those around him. And then there was a book compiled of his teaching afterwards called The Practice of the Presence of God. You can get the book. It's an interesting book. He almost died 3 times in his life. And what's interesting is that after the first time he almost died, he said to his doctor, "Doctor, your remedies have worked too well for me. You have only delayed my happiness." He wanted nothing more than to be with God. See, this was a practicing the presence of God over months and years and decades, practicing the presence of God, so much so that he was ready anytime God would take him. I've told you about my friend Bruce. Very similar. Bruce practiced the presence of God every day, spent hours in the presence of God, had a terminal disease on his liver, was not allowed to drink a lot of water, so he was always thirsty all the time. Well, Bruce got throat cancer, and he said to me, "I don't want to call the doctor. I think I just want to go. I'm ready to go. I long to be with Jesus." And then he felt convicted about it. And so he went to the doctor, and they did treatment, and he went into remission. And Bruce was terribly disappointed because he would live longer. Bruce got his wish some years later and went to be with Jesus. I talked to him the day before he died, and he said, I'm kind of in this state where I don't know if I see Jesus here, but I don't know if he's real, or if I'm here or if I'm there, I don't know where I am. And then he passed on into glory. Both of these men, though their lives were fraught with difficulty, were examples of what I think were examples of verse 3 that says, "He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers." Does this mean that everything he touches turns to gold? That he prospers monetarily? That he prospers physically? That he prospers in all these ways? No, neither one of them prospered in these ways at all. But they were like trees. You don't know the influence that Bruce was on me just by our spending time together, just by our going to eat at a Chinese buffet, and just the stuff that he talked about. It was like water for my soul. He was like a tree planted by the water. See, it has nothing to do with being successful in the eyes of our culture, or marrying the perfect mate, or having no conflict in your relationship, or being wealthy, healthy, wealthy, and wise, as they say. To be fruitful and to prosper is to have ultimate delight and pleasure in your heart. And what the psalm is saying here is that there is no way to have this and to be fruitful and to prosper unless it is in God. There is no way to have that happen. So I ask you again, how do we get there? I had crushes on numerous girls when I was a sophomore in college. I signed up for a backgammon tournament, and they hooked me up with this girl who didn't know how to play. So I taught her how to play. And through the whole thing, she just kept smiling at me. And I was smitten. I was smitten. 38 years later, I'm still smitten by her smile. Brothers and sisters, Jesus is smiling at you. He's saying, come to me. Be smitten with me. Fall in love with me. I am here for you. I am the definition of beauty. Jesus came to this earth. He lived a difficult life. He was born to poor parents, learning to walk, to talk, to read, to write, submitting himself to sickness, to broken relationships, then confronting the religious leaders and the powers that be that were leading the people astray, and then submitting himself to torture and ultimately to death. Brothers and sisters, what we have in Psalm 1 is really a description of Jesus. He never walked with the wicked or with the sinners or the scoffers. He never sat down with them and became like them. He did walk with them to bring them to himself. But he never submitted to that. But his delight was in meditating on his Father's words. But it wasn't just his Father's words. You know what John 1 says? In the beginning, the Word. Jesus was the Word of God. He's the living manifestation of the Word of God. Jesus is the one. He's the one that obeyed perfectly and went to a cross. And he smiles at us. And he extends his hand to us. And he delights in us. Can you imagine that? Listen to how the book of Zephaniah puts it. The Lord your God is in your midst, a mighty one who will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you by his love. He will exult over you with loud singing. Why don't we believe that? And we run after so many things. And he is saying, I'm rejoicing over you with singing. I love you. I am what will give delight, true delight to your soul, where the circumstances start to fade and I begin to loom larger. Brothers and sisters, this is what we need. This is what we need. Do you not think that God has sheer delight in us? That verse tells us he does. The one who made the mountains, who made the beautiful sunset, who made creation to sing his praise and gave it to us for our enjoyment, and then gave his son to die so that we would not have to. Why wouldn't we delight in him? Let me end with this psalm that we're going to sing. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. Psalm 34. My soul makes its boast in the Lord. Let the humble hear and be glad. Oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant, and their faces shall never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all of his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and delivers them. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Would you taste? Would you see that the Lord is good? That's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.